Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Supatease here, and as you can see with the title of the video, I want to go over something that means a lot to me. World of Warcraft means a lot to me. I just got home from a run, so I'm feeling pretty good. BFA is obviously pretty close to release, and if you don't know, the 120 Gladiator Sanctum realm, which is kind of the PvP testing realm, max level characters, all gear available, all traits to explore, everything's out there to kind of try. I've sort of dug my hands into Moonkin and Discipline Priest primarily, first all. I want to say we're probably just going to be chilling here. This is more like a rant, and well, maybe rant is too negative a word, but more of just a thought process, an analysis of the things that I like moving into BFA, and then of course the things that I'm not so fond of moving into BFA. And we'll have the flute of positivity to keep it positive. So make sure to keep positive. But one thing I will say maybe into BFA that I am glad to see is the customization of your character. So as you may not know if you didn't play Legion, your characters in player versus player combat were templated, which means you couldn't stack haste or mastery or really change your playstyle with your stat distribution. And a lot of players gave critique to that you couldn't customize your character, which I agree with. For me, some of my greatest memories in previous expansions like Cataclysm, I played Balanced Druid, and I didn't have access to PvE gear because I only PvP'd, so I couldn't really outdamage the geared PvE Moonkins that had special trinkets or legendaries. So instead of going the damage route, I went a utility route and focused on resilience and being really tanky and focusing on defensive play. And I kind of made my way through the ladder, taking on a different play style than a lot of the other Moonkins that at that time usually played damage compositions with Warlocks and just did a bunch of damage. I focused on utility and the hybrid role. And moving into BFA, it looks like that's going to be the case again, where you'll be able to customize your characters. I really went over all of the traits for Discipline Priest in particular, and there were a couple of like really playful, cheeky setups where you could go for like all this damage stuff, Laser Matrix, where your spells trigger more damage, and you'd be almost acting like a third DPS, but you'd be all-inning that into damage dealing rather than healing. You could then, of course, go the opposite direction, get all of your traits and your stats, stack mastery, and go for more of a defensive option. And then there were some traits, one in particular I don't really remember the name of, but it was a snare, so your damage spells randomly could slow people, and Discipline Priest doesn't have a slow, so I thought that was interesting. So I put a bunch of sets together to try and make a slow priest set. So maybe if you're healing a comp that doesn't have a snare, you randomly can apply the snare since you have dots on everyone, and you'd be pretty likely to apply that slow. So I was just getting cheeky with the different sets. I will say as a bit of a critique is that it's incredibly overwhelming, the amount of information that's actually out there to try and like soak up and absorb and read. It can give you quite a bit of a headache. Even just for myself, going through Discipline Priest on its own took me maybe an hour to 2 hours to really figure it out. It kind of depends what you want, because in a lot of senses that's actually a good thing as well. That's like, hey, there's a bunch of stuff that you can really do to customize your character. So if we're sticking on that side of the fence, it's actually a really awesome thing, which I'm glad for, actually. Even though it's an information overload right now, in the long run, if you're able to kind of individualize your character in an MMO and kind of make your way as a unique individual, I think that's going to be important and pretty awesome for the game overall. So I'm actually fond of the information overload, even though it gives me a headache in the short term. I will say the downside of all of this amazing customization is that gear is still awarded randomly. That being said, you get a guaranteed piece of loot when you reach a conquest cap, I believe, every week, which will, for example, the first week you're guaranteed a weapon. The issue where I have into this is that, yes, you'll always be able to finish your set of gear, but you won't be able to itemize your character. So whatever stats are on that piece, that's your weapon is guaranteed, the stats you don't get to pick. So the stats are still random. So if you're a class and you really wanted to make a crit haste build as a Discipline Priest and be kind of a damage dealing Discipline Priest, but the weapon you get has haste mastery, you can't swap that out. You're stuck with that. And then outside of that guaranteed piece of gear a week, you're still being awarded gear the same way as you would in Legion, where it's just random. Depending on your rating, it's going to be higher item level gear. Straight off the bat, what that tells me and gives me great concern is that PvE gear will be significantly better in PvP. For example, in previous expansions, there were ways to kind of counteract this, where the trinkets would have a set bonus. So if you wore 2 PvP trinkets, you took less damage than other players, or did more damage. I don't remember exactly, but there was a set bonus for wearing 2 PvP only trinkets. That set bonus no longer exists, and the PvP trinkets really suck. They're really boring. They've been the same trinkets for over a decade. You've got a versatility on use main stat. You got a proc trinket that gives you a main stat, and you've got your battle master trinket. And I didn't see accolade stat sticks, which makes me wonder if stat sticks, the one trinket that was actually good but still boring, actually got removed. So PvP trinkets in general are just really bad, especially in comparison to some of the crazy PvE ones that I was trying out, which, I mean, for me, I'm going to dive into PvE. I'm doing Mythic Plus, I'm doing raiding, I'm doing everything at the top level in WoW because I have all the free time to do it. I'm fortunate to be privileged to have that opportunity, but if you're a player that's only focused on PvP, you will be drowning in anyone that PvE is going into your domain, which, it's, to be fair, it's sort of used to. However, you had things that sort of absorb the impact, like I said, with the trinket set bonuses, with resilience on PvP gear. So if you wore PvE gear, yeah, you would blow PvP gear's damage out of the water, but you took more damage, so you were a glass cannon. So these things that kind of alleviated it are gone. So unless they add PvP trinkets that are as good as PvE ones, which I find would be unlikely, it's just going to be better to PvE, I think, in a lot of cases. And I don't think that PvP gear is even better than PvE gear in PvP, and PvP gear may be better in PvE, and it's entirely dependent on the stats that you get. It's basically you're just randomizing it and hoping that you get it. So overall, even though they've reintroduced all of this awesome customization, this like information overload, I think a lot of people were asking for, and a lot of people probably weren't, because again, this is going to be something that you either really like or you really don't like. I know that there's a lot of players, and I bounce between this mentality as well, is like, I just want to play arena. I don't want to worry about my gear being better or worse than somebody's. I just want to go in, play the game, and win because I played better than them, right? That makes sense. But I'm also on the side of the fence where it's an MMO, and I put a ton of time into my character, and I want that to actually feel like something in the game. Otherwise, it's a little bit lifeless in that sense. So in BFA, it feels like they're going the route of introducing the customization again, but not doing it in a way that you'll be able to guarantee what pieces of gear you get. So if you're playing BFA and you have a lot of free time and you have interest in raiding Mythic Plus and PvP, you're gonna probably have a blast. Period. It's gonna be like vanilla days. Like, you're gonna have a blast. So I'm excited for that a little bit, but I also feel for the people that don't have a lot of time and want to play on a competitive level in terms of their gear, and having it be more about skill. Like, it's difficult for me to really take a side on that, because I bounce between the two of them every day in my own head and when I'm playing the game as well. So you get this, take it or leave it. I will say, in this decision that they've gone with, they've went all the way in one direction, which I would give them credit. This is not an easy thing, I think, to decide, to either go completely in the side of this is an MMO, your gear and time spent matters, or this is now a PvP mini game existing in an MMO where skill matters. There are a couple things for community tournament organizers that I'm concerned about, is how you're going to do that, because in Warlords of Draenor, when gear and stats mattered, we had a vendor that sold tournament gear, and that tournament gear only worked in war games, so everyone was equal in tournament play. I don't know if they're going to reintroduce that tournament vendor, so players in tournaments can do that, or if they'll maybe have a tournament realm open to players, and give access to community organizers. That would be the greatest thing. I would love that, but I hope there's a solution there, because tournaments won't be about skill if there's no vendor to equalize your gear, which I think is very important outside of the game especially. But from my point of view, this is kind of, it's nice because it's been a long time since all of the gear in the game actually mattered. Like, trinkets are cool, even though sometimes they're crazy and stupid, they're also cool as well. So it's difficult really for me to side on either side. I'm just on the side of, at the moment, of being excited for it. It's new. It's been a long time since, like, our trinkets have mattered, PvE trinkets are usable. I just think there's things they should keep an eye on, such as potentially needing something to make PvP gear the best gear in PvP at least. Because I think in a lot of cases, PvP gear is not the best gear in any scenario of the game. Rating gear, Mythic Plus gear will be the best gear in every scenario of the game, in their own domain and in PvP's domain, and then PvP doesn't get to go into the other ones or even be best in its own. So if you're interested in your character's power progression, you definitely want to play the whole game, and obviously it's an MMO, so you have to give credit to that. And like for me, for example, I'm going to be doing everything in the game. I'm going to be no-lifing forever and diving into it. I haven't really picked a main yet, and I know this is probably a question. I'm kind of going off topic here on a tangent. Eric's probably like, is Moonkin really good? I think Moonkin is better than Legion. I would say it's not incredibly better, but they took some of the talents that were basically not usable the entire expansion, so you can't even say they existed in Legion, and then now they're usable. So it's almost like getting a new spell. So I believe it's Fury of Elune, if I'm not mistaking it. It's basically Antares, the Heroes of the Storm character, the Protoss guy that shoots a laser beam and chases people. Yeah, you shoot a giant laser beam that chases people, and it gives you star surges. They also did some quality life things to Moonkin, so that you start the game with a talent. You start the game with astral power, so you can kind of get in there. So if a bunch of melee jump on you, you can actually shoot a star surge at them before you're dead. So it's overall, Moonkin is definitely improved. I'm really happy with the quality of life improvements to it that they made, and it got like a little touch up before the expansion came out. And I think that during the Q&A, Ian had said that they weren't ready or really happy with every single spec, and some specs would be getting revamps later on, but I don't think they're getting them before BFA. But from what I've seen with Moonkin, Shadow Priest, Elemental, and Discipline Priest, I was very happy with those ones that I've saw. Shadow Priest in particular got Life Grip back, so we got some team utility. Discipline Priest got their buff back, Fortitude. I'd love to see Druid get Mark of the Wild back. I know it's like, oh, well, they got a buff, how do we make it unique? Everyone just brings a buff, but the mechanics of having a buff in PvP mattered so much, because you would fight teams that could purge, so they'd remove your buff. So you would have to be aware, did they remove my buff? Get that buff back up. And this was sort of a micromanagement skill factor to the game. So that was why the buffs were important. It wasn't even so much that this buff is unique. It was just, are you managing that buff? Are you maintaining that buff over the duration of a fight? If you're not, then your team's doing less damage or taking more damage, whatever the case may be. So having a buff was super important, which made me almost instantly love Discipline Priest more than Druid, just simply because it had Fortitude. And Mark of the Wild didn't end up making the cut moving into BFA, so that was a bit of a disappointment. But off the tangent of Moonkin being good or bad, which I would say that it's improved over Legion. The customization is great. I think the information overload is a headache right now, but once everybody gets into it and things have kind of been mathed out, it's going to be a lot better, because I feel like there's significant customization within the options of the traits on the gear, and then even your stats amongst that, because you might be going for an aggressive trait build. That means you take crit maybe, so you want some extra spells or procs to crit more often, so you go crit instead of a different stat, and you can really dig into that and add a lot of customization. That's great. No complaints there. The gear, the stats are still random. Not so good. Not so good. I can pretty much just flat out say it. PvP players want a vendor. I want to earn points. I want to go buy my piece with the stats on it that I want. And I understand that deterministic gear in PvP would then make PvP an obligation for PvEers, if you really think about it, right? If you're a raider and all you need is a pair of bracers with haste mastery, and the PvP vendor sells bracers with haste mastery, and you just need to earn points and you can buy them, and that's guaranteed, you're pretty obligated to go that route at some point in your life, which I don't think is terrible or the end of the world, but there are PvEers that don't want a PvP at all, which is fair enough. But what I will say is the PvP players, at least myself, and I feel like a lot of people that have vocalized this, is they like being able to buy the gear, buy the stats they want, customize the character the way that they want to, and see that progress. So even though we're getting a guaranteed piece of gear, the stats on it aren't guaranteed to what we may want to do with our character, which I don't like. And I would sacrifice PvP gear being worse than PvE gear in PvE simply for that fact, to be able to buy the gear that I want in my PvP environment. And then maybe it's slightly weaker, but you could cross over. I feel like it's such a difficult thing to balance, because you're going to upset someone no matter what. If the PvP gear is deterministic and PvEers that don't want a PvP have to do it because they can buy gear guaranteed, they're going to be unhappy. So it's really difficult. I can see why, like, there's no real way of satisfying anybody. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm kind of disappointed that all this amazing customization is going into the game, but all of the gear's stats are random, and I'm never really guaranteed to ever be able to finish that cool set, number one, that I might want to go for. And then number two, maybe that cheeky set that I'm going for isn't even very good, so I'm going to waste a lot of time trying to get all this random gear for a set that might not even end up being very good, so it doesn't make me want to be creative. So it kind of just downpours from there. So it's amazing, the customization. I'm interested to see how it plays out. With trinkets working, I'd like to see PvP trinkets, some new PvP trinkets. I want a tentacle PvP trinket. I don't care, like Gerthalak, like some cool PvP trinket. I'm like, oh my god, like this is what like I've been waiting for. Like the trinkets that exist in every other avenue of the game, just that cool trinket from PvP trinket would just be really awesome. If there's no possible way to implement the PvP trinket bonuses to encourage people to use PvP trinkets, which at the same time is kind of boring. I'd just rather PvP trinkets be more interesting. But I'm going on a bit of a tangent there. So yeah, the customization is great, but the stats are random, so it's going to be difficult to really finish any set that you really want to do. If you got a lot of time on your hands, you're really going to love BFA, I think. There's just a lot of time that you can just put into everything. If you're someone like myself, you're interested in everything the game has to offer, you're going to reap the benefits of that significantly, and you're going to have a good time. If you're somebody who doesn't really have a lot of time, it's going to be rough, I think, especially if you're a PvP only player. I think it may be pretty rough. I'm not sure. I think there may be some things that buffer characters so that you're not at too much of an advantage in terms of power than other players, I believe, but I'm not certain on that. And I think that's more so because PvP gear is going to be inferior to PvE gear, simply on the trinket side of it. And then you kind of relying on the main stat gear. You're only getting gear from one avenue. You're going to need to be high rated to get that good gear. But to be fair, if you really think about that, it's like you need to be good and you get good stuff. That kind of makes sense. I mean, maybe I sound like a jerk, but that kind of makes sense. So I'm pleased with that. The only disappointment is that there's no new cool PvP trinkets. I'd also like to see some new honor talents. Some specializations such as Moonkin. I really felt like with this new bucket system, basically the honor talents have changed. They put them in a bucket, and then you get to pick 3 of them out of the bucket, any of them. So if you had some really cool ones in Legion that were all in the last row, you now can just take all 3 from the last row if you really want to do it. Moonkin has like really tanky self-defense talents, damage boosting talents, healing talents, utility talents, counter-aggression talents. Like Moonkin had like so many different little builds that I could do that really made me like it. And then I log on Hunter and I'm like, well, Roar Sacrifice is now an honor talent. That's mandatory. So now I only get to take 2 talents out of the bucket. What I would really like to see is certain honor talents that are basically always taken. So something like Roar Sacrifice or Cyclone or Grounding Totem or Spell Reflect or Dark Simulacron, these honor talents, I would love them baked into all of the rest of them. So no matter what honor talent you take, you are also getting Dark Simulacron, Spell Reflect, Cyclone, whatever, like all the talents that are basically mandatory. That way those classes get to take 3 out of the bucket rather than, all right, I have to take this one and then I get to take 2. I think it's like a bit unfair in that sense. It would be nicer if the honor talents baked in the mandatory ones so that then you could customize your character more from the remaining honor talents that were available. Would be something that I would like to see in terms of honor talent changes and just some new ones. I don't think Hunter really has many interesting options. Moonkin felt really cool. Discipline Priest felt really cool. You can take Archangel and Dark Archangel. You boost your heals, boost your damage, or you could focus on healing. It had a lot of options. There are specs there with a lot of different customization and cool options, which I appreciated, but some of them I think were a little bit lackluster. So overall, I think the honor talent system to a bucket system is an improvement. It's a lot more cool and more unique and more customization. But I would like to see more of them, and I'd like to see some of the talents that are always taken baked into the rest of them. Moving on from honor talents, so we've talked about customization, we've talked about gear rewards. Let's talk about the classes, right? Because I mean, in PvP, the classes pretty much are the game. Of the classes that I've tried, I enjoyed them a lot. I enjoyed Moonkin, I enjoyed Shadow Priest, I enjoyed Discipline Priest quite a lot. I will say if you're somebody that just wants to sit down and hammer away for a bit, the classes are perfect. And I'm not being sarcastic in that sense. If you just want to log in, and play your warrior, you're going to have a blast on it for a couple of hours. Where I then get concerned about for the classes in terms of long-term mastery. So can I log on my Moonkin 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? You might be saying, well, what are you doing? Like, why are you logging on to your Moonkin for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week or something like that, right? But for someone like me, I used the game to get good at it and practice it, and I enjoyed it that much, and I wanted to spend that much time, and it was really the depth of the class that got me coming back to it alongside of all of the customization options that were available previous expansions. So is the depth there? We're really going to find out after the expansion launches in particular. There are some specs that I think have the depth to keep you interested and going, but then there's other specs that I'm pretty concerned about. So I feel like something like the mage specs in particular are kind of one-dimensional and repetitive in their play styles. So I feel like mages and maybe even some hunter specs, although I've seen some feedback from Dilly, he's enjoying survival, so I'm not going to really comment on the specs that I really haven't had a chance to test. I'm just going to raise it as a concern that the depth of the classes overall may not be at the point that would be preferential to me to spend a lot of time on them and really enjoy mastering them. But in terms of customization, content to grind, and sort of options that you have on the table for your character's power, it's all there. Like, BFA is probably one of the best expansions for that that we've seen in quite a long time. So I'm pretty pleased with it overall, and considering that I was pretty pessimistic of it, mostly because it felt like time was going on and on and on, and there was no max level PvP server. What's going on? Like, is this gonna happen? And I had like a lot of concerns, and I was super panicked about it and worried about it. But now that it's out and then I can get my hands on it and I'm seeing the different customization options, the first thing is I got a headache because there's so much information. But then the second part of that headache was like, hey, a headache feels pretty good. I haven't had to think about my character in a long time. Now I actually can think about it. It's like, do I want to go for haste, mastery, crit, whatever, the damage traits, healing traits, utility traits. It was a nice kind of breath of fresh air once I got past the initial, like, oh god, information overload. So I'm pretty excited for BFA. Thank you for sitting through this video. I hope that you got something out of it that you were looking for in terms of you maybe checking out BFA or returning to World of Warcraft. I think it's going to be pretty good. I'm still going to keep my eyes on it. I've got, again, those concerns that I've already raised, such as community tournaments, how our characters going to be evened out in power, the stats on gear from PvP being random still, so you can't guarantee yourself to complete a certain set of itemization that you would like to do in your build. And also you are likely to have to PvE to get certain traits, especially if you want to do certain builds, which again, I don't think is the worst thing. I think it's good to have PvP players crossing over into PvE, and I also think it's good to have PvE players crossing over into PvP. Don't hurt me, please. WoW is a big game, and it encompasses a lot of things, and some of the most fun times in the game is when I was doing everything in the game. So what I hope is that at least PvP gear is equivalent, if it's going to stay the same structure, is equivalent to PvE gear, and there's some new trinkets. A cool tentacle trinket. Anything from PvP, something that I can be excited about when I'm doing arena, just as I would be excited to kill in a Mythic Plus or a raid boss. That's my biggest grief there, basically. But I think BFA will actually end up being pretty good overall, and I'm pretty pessimistic. I think I'm probably considered a jerk to a lot of people, so I'm pretty excited for BFA overall. If you're wondering what classes I'm going to be leveling, I don't know if I'm doing Druid first, because I had too much fun on Discipline Priest. So I'm on the fence right now between Discipline Priest and Resto Druid Moonkin, which is kind of the standard combo that I've done for a while. So I'll let you know when I get closer to it after I've tried it and tested it a little bit more. But either way, that goes my initial kind of assessment of Battle for Azeroth. And remember, it's just my opinion, and I haven't had the most amount of time to really get my hands around it. This is kind of my initial experience and my potential concerns moving into the future. So take it with a grain of salt. I hope that you enjoyed the content today, and I will see you in Azeroth. That was really cringy, but we're keeping it.